has a meaning. The second phase talks about our historical presence in this territory here for both Esquimalt and Songhees. I know for a long time I was expressing that our people have been invisible for too long.
The Harbour Authority essentially was trying to find a way to raise awareness of the local nations, the Songhees and Esquimalt, and simultaneously provide opportunities for youth employment and supporting people from the two communities. When thinking about what the theme for Phase 2 was going to be, both Darlene and Butch, they consulted together and they wanted to honor the ancestors.
It was a continuation, so there had to be a flow of designs and just sort of going into the next phase and still representing what we're hired to represent, and that's the bands that were from, Songhees Nation and the Esquimalt Nation.
I also wanted to include pieces of historical things, like the way the longhouse would have looked, or the places along the beach, the canoes, how it would have felt in a village before contact. And I wanted to show what it would feel like to be in a forest and to have the huge trees, the huge cedar trees, which are such a big, important part of our culture with our clothing and our baskets and our medicine and everything that we used in the forest before contact. That piece of history just felt like it needed to be told in a visual sense on the wall, for people to come and look at it and gaze upon it and think, oh yeah, there was people here for thousands and thousands of years before the Europeans came.
Woven throughout are elements of the history and traditional teachings and legends as well that you can read about in the interpretive panel or online.
Every year we hire new youth to work on the mural, and the selection process was really hard because there was so much talent that applied this year.
For recruitment and selection of the youth team, we followed a similar process that we did in year one. Put out the job advertisement. We went to a few schools, presented the project and the opportunity, and then from the applications that we received, we made a short list, and those people came for an interview and brought in a portfolio.
There's only so much you learn about First Nation history in school, and it's not the nations that are in our community.
Last year's looked so much simpler, but this one's got way more detail.
I just seen it on a paper and I was like, wow, that looks so fun. I should try that.
My original idea was to just hire Aboriginal youth to do the project, to give them not only an experience but also an employment experience, that has all the teachings attached to that.
The mural itself is basically giving and teaching our youth the importance of working with people who are not just Native but non-Native as well. And it's also important to understand it teaches them to understand the history too and where it all came from.
I lived in this city for 6 years and I've never really paid any attention to the South Coast style. I always thought it was just like an amalgamation of all the different coasts together. Really working on this mural gives me an opportunity to kind of, become more aware of their style and really appreciate it a bit more.
Really, the bottom line is the youth, and not only creating a good work experience, but having them take the responsibility of producing a piece of public art and the responsibilities behind that, because it's not merely just painting pictures on the wall. There's more to it when you represent people.
All the things that are connected have been disconnected. So, when you look at your work, the moon, the wolf, the singer, the drum, the fish, the trees, the fire, every one of them have a story to tell you. The fire is true. I could go all day long about fire.
Having Tom describe to the youth and pointing out to them as he was sitting in the shop the design elements that related to the stories he was telling really elevated the sacredness of the task at hand and the process that we were all working to achieve together.
Places like you've got on here and down on the water, out in the breakwater, that helps us remind us about how we should be, how you could be as a person.
He wants us to, to say, well, you guys have to learn what I know and pass it along to younger people. Mm-hmm. And here's a wealth of information.
I'd really like to see, with the continuation of this project, more and more youth getting the opportunity to mentor under established artists, learn the traditions of the local nations. And it's a giant canvas, so there's all kinds of messages that can be sent.
Our people, Esquimalt and Songhees, we speak the same language, just about. We have a few words difference. And that's what tells us who we are when it comes to the land.
After the bookend beginning of the mural, there's a speaker. Traditionally in the big house, one person is appointed as the speaker, and the words are trailing out of the speaker's mouth to go to the upper wall. And this was a very significant element of Phase 2, was the incorporation of the Lekwungen language, which there are very few native fluent speakers alive today.
It's hard because we're all English speakers,
right?
First, and then the language comes after that. So it should be the other way around. Mm-hmm. So essentially, Lekwungen dialect is extinct on the Songhees Nation, mm-hmm. and we have to reintroduce the language back to the community.
I was invited by Butch to go to the language class on the Songhees Nation. And sitting in the class and learning my traditional history, you can't learn the language without learning the history. You can't separate the two. You actually have to be educated, like intensely, about the history of our people before you can actually verbalize the meaning of some of the words from our nation. So that was a real education for me to learn that. And of course, our language has never been written or even visually been seen written.
Hope that, like the people know in the breakwater, that they will see the language and their interest will be there to say, well, I have to learn more. Mm-hmm.
One of the stereotypes about First Nations in this province is the idea that First Nations live some kind of a static way of life since the beginning of time, and they only changed after Europeans came on the scene. One of the things that's really important to understand is that the Aboriginal cultures in British Columbia were extremely dynamic. We had enormous catastrophic changes in the landscape over thousands of years, and First Nations were continually adapting to these changes in the natural world, as well as adapting to all the other First Nations groups that are around them. So the First Nations history here is one that's really exciting, is dynamic, and it's something that I'm really fascinated with trying to understand.
So many people say to me, I didn't even know that there was first people who lived along the coast in Victoria. Like, they didn't realize that. It's not something that maybe they learned through school. They didn't even know that Esquimalt and Songhees Nation were at one time one tribe. They didn't realize that we spoke Lekwungen. They didn't realize that the area that's where Ogden Point was our fishing grounds. They didn't realize that. There's just so much information that they're learning.
People often say, well, don't you want to work in Egypt or South America? Well, no, these people here, their history is just as valuable as anybody else's and just as interesting.
I think it's mostly to do with kind of an absence of history in Victoria, and not so much that we don't really appreciate it, but we don't embrace it and we don't learn from our history. 'Cause, you know, you have to learn from the past in order to have a brighter future.
Most of the things that are visually portrayed are poles and house types more typical of northern cultures, and now we're seeing the greater recognition. Yes, there were local First Nations that have their own important history and their own values, who are creative artists in the past and continuing with creative artists today. So I think it's really wonderful to see the paintings at Ogden Point and all the other artwork that is springing up around the town, and I'd like to encourage more and more of it to be placed in all around the city.
I think it's pride and representation, because I'm a Songhees band member, and I pride myself in that. And there's I'm also related to the Esquimalt Nation, and I'm Coast Salish, and our language is being represented, our symbols are being represented.
A child to see it today and to grow up with that information and that visual in front of them, it's going to change the way the history of Victoria will be looked at in the next 20 years.
So what you see before you is a lot of hard work and dedication and commitment by a lot of good people. And it's all in the sake of awareness and enrichment. And it's working. But this is just one door opened. We need more.